Gig Gab, episode 444. Wait, no, I have that backwards. 444 for Monday, August 26th, National Spark the World Day 2024. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians. Here, as usual, in Durham, New Hampshire, I'm Dave Hamilton. And today, my guest co-host is, well, let me see if I get this right, a cognitive neuroscientist, a musician, a record producer, the author of 4 New York Times best-selling books, including one that we mentioned recently, This Is Your Brain on Music, and about to release his next book, I Heard There Was a Secret Chord, Music as Medicine. He's played and collaborated with Victor Wooten, Bobby McFerrin, Joni Mitchell, Roseanne Cash, and so many more. I'm really fortunate to call him a friend, Dr. Daniel Levitin. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today.
I'm so glad to be here, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's funny. I had been thinking for years about, and I'd had you on my list of people like, oh, I want to get like Dr. Dan on the show. This would be amazing. You have there's so many reasons why this would make so much sense. And then this past winter, I had Mike Schulte on the show, who's on regularly, and he mentioned This Is Your Brain on Music. And I was like, oh, you've completed the circle for me. And so I reached out to you, and you said, I can't come on the show because I'm finishing my next book, which of course I had no idea about. And now your book is about to release on the 27th, so the day after this episode comes out. And congratulations on this. So let's talk about the book. We're going to talk about gigs and the Levitin Effect, because I think that's a really interesting thing that you came up with years and years ago. And we'll tell some more of your story. But let's start with the book. Why not?
Sure. Well, so 20 years ago, when I was writing This Is Your Brain on Music, I wanted to be able to write about the medicinal effects of music. For chronic pain and for treating illness and injury, but also just for improving one's overall lifestyle and productivity and mood. But the research, Dave, was really thin. And as a scientist, I felt an obligation to not start speculating and cherry picking studies that would show what I wanted them to show. So the book became something different than I intended. It became more about the neural circuits of listening to and performing music, and a kind of quick whistle-stop tour through cognitive psychology and brain science with music as the lens. But now, 20 years later, there have been thousands of papers published on music and medicine, and here we are. Interesting.
And maybe you even inspired some of those to be published, and there's a full circle here. So I like that. That's good. So this book, I have had the pleasure of reading it, dives into all of this stuff, and it's fascinating. One of the first, as I was reading it, I started pulling quotes out that I thought were great, and then I realized I had too many, and I just needed to keep reading, because one of my favorite quotes that I don't think was in the book, and certainly I wouldn't attribute to you or me, is that music is what feelings sound like. And early in the book, you said science seeks to find the truth in the natural world. Art seeks to find truth in the emotional world. And obviously that very much resonated with me. But you really do dive in. So there's so much of this that we're not going to get to all of it, but that's okay. Good news. Dan wrote a book. You can go read it. But the connection between music and the default mode network really fascinated me as someone who's become aware of the default mode network over my life and like these things. So can you elaborate on that and maybe briefly explain to people what the default mode network is? Because I could do it, but I have you here, so why would I bother?
Well, you're probably more eloquent than I.
I don't know about that.
And you're 3 hours ahead, so you've got that advantage.
That I do. That's right. Yeah. But linear time, if you really want to go somewhere, like, does linear time does it exist, or is it just a construct that we humans came up with so that our feeble brains could understand what time actually is?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's the latter. I mean,
Yeah.
everything happens all at once in
Yes.
a cosmic sense. So
Yes. Yeah.
which means
But back to our feeble human brains. Yeah, yeah.
in some world, I already explained this, and so I don't have to now.
Oh, that's true. All right, moving on. No, never.
The default mode network is interesting. It's the easiest way to describe it is if you're reading a book and you realize after a couple of pages your eyes have been following the words, but you weren't really paying attention and you don't know what you just read. Has that ever happened to you?
Always. Yes, not always, but often. Yes, of course.
Well, so what was happening was your mind wandered, and we now recognize that mind wandering mode is a kind of default state of the brain, meaning that if you don't expend some neural resources to pay attention, to actually direct your attention, your brain is going to default into this mind wandering mode or daydreaming mode. And when we say pay attention, that's an apt metaphor because you're paying with oxygenated glucose. You're paying with a limited resource in your brain. And after a certain amount of time of paying attention to something, your brain needs a rest and it starts daydreaming.
Interesting. All right, so this is we all have an excuse for doing this now because our brains need to rest and to recharge.
They do. And so I would say a problem with modern society is that in this over-caffeinated world, when we feel our attention flagging, we reach for another cup of coffee when in reality we just need maybe a 15-minute break.
Yeah.
And that break of daydreaming is sometimes hard to shift into, even though it's the default mode. It can be that switch between the two modes can get sticky. And so one way to reliably get in the default mode is to go for a walk in nature. Another is to do yoga or meditation. But the most enjoyable one for many of us is just listening to music. Not while doing something else, just listening to music or playing music.
Actively listening to music, or of course actively playing it, which means playing music, but not like letting your eyes just watch what's on the TV screen in the back of the bar because you're bored while you're playing. Like actually playing music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. All right. That makes sense to me. I'm
so glad.
Yeah. I think a big part of our, over caffeinated world or our 24-hour attention world is we have to give ourselves permission to sit and actively listen to music. That feels like a leisure activity and of course can be, and there's nothing wrong with that. But taking 15 minutes in the middle of your workday and actively listening to music, that can feel like you're, being quote unquote lazy. And we all need permission to do that. It's good for us.
Well, the research is very clear, Dave, that if you take that 15-minute break, whether it's listening to music or just meditating or doing something that allows your mind to wander, when you get back to work, you'll be more productive and more creative. And people who take these 15-minute breaks throughout the day, every hour and a half or two, their work is rated by managers as being of greater quality and greater quantity. They actually get more done, even though they're less time on task.
That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, it's about productivity, not being busy, right?
And it's about efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Fascinating. All right. Thank you for that. I love that description of the default mode network. That you were far more eloquent with it than I would have been. So we'll make a point of that. You talk about music as medicine and that there has been research done in the past 20 years. What are some of the significant things that you've become aware of in that time?
Well, so up until 20 years ago, most of the research that was done was poorly conducted. You'll appreciate this, knowing your background and all. And hopefully our listeners will too. There'd be studies done without a control group. So, for example, they'd play people Mozart and then give them puzzles to do. And the question was, did Mozart make you better at the puzzles? And by proxy, did it somehow make you smarter? And then what was the control group? Well, it was a group of people sitting in a windowless room with nothing to do. That doesn't seem like a suitable control. And when that so-called Mozart effect paper was replicated now 100 times, as long as you gave the control group something to do, anything at all, listening to a book on tape, looking at a magazine, being in a windowed room where they could look out, they performed as well as the Mozart group. So it wasn't that Mozart made you smarter. It's that sitting in a windowless room made you dumber temporarily. It basically lowered your levels of arousal. So there was a lot of poorly designed studies, and that's changed. And you asked for some of the high points. I think the easiest way to visualize it is with a case that's not that common, but I think it'll make the most sense as a launch point, and that's Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
So Parkinson's is on the rise. It's primarily a disease that afflicts older adults, and we're living longer. And many Parkinson's patients can't walk. They freeze while they're walking, or they can't get started. And this is because the circuits in the brain that synchronize their gait or get their gait going, you need to have a steady gait so you don't fall over.
Sure.
Those circuits degrade due to the disease. The neurons actually die out. And fortunately, the brain has a lot of redundant and overlapping circuits. And if you play music to a Parkinson's patient, other circuits in the brain will start firing in synchrony with the tempo of the music. And that will help them to jumpstart their walking. And they won't freeze, and they'll walk with a steady gait, not only while the music's playing, but for some time after it stopped playing, because this neural synchrony has provided that entrainment that they need.
Wow. So music really can be not a cure for Parkinson's, but a treatment for it,
exactly.
Perhaps. Yeah.
And there are other examples that, like chronic pain. We find, my lab was the first to show that when you listen to music you like, your brain releases its own opioids. So what do we do when we're in terrible pain? We take opioids in a pill, and your brain is making them at least some of the time. And so why not use those?
Again, this all makes sense. I think at some level.
Don't tell the Sacklers.
Well, the Sacklers kind of have their own set of problems right now. Yeah. So, yeah. That makes sense. I mean, music is a mood lifter. Music is and of course, I don't want to gloss over something that you said. Music that you like as a mood lifter. Music that you like releases those opioids. Music that you don't like, I assume, would release things that make you potentially feel agitated or something along those lines. Is that right?
You're exactly right. So cortisol is the stress hormone, and it's released historically when a tiger comes attacking you, or there's an avalanche, or somebody comes at you with a spear. But now we have cortisol released when our boss yells at us, or we get cut off in traffic, or when we are forced to listen to music we don't like. And that's what led Manuel Noriega to leave his compound. You remember?
Yes.
The U.S. military played him Van Halen music at 120 decibels, and nothing else worked. Shutting off the water, not allowing any people to go in or out, cutting off their food, the heat, nothing else worked except unwanted music.
So it might be apt to say everybody wants some except Manuel Noriega.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it made him jump.
Very nicely done. Yeah, thank you. I knew we were going to have fun here. But this leads me to a question, because of course, whether you like something, whether music is likable or not is subjective. We all know this. But we also know that some music is more generally liked. I don't want to misspeak and say more universally liked, but more generally liked than others, especially in a given society. Here in the United States, especially amongst a certain age group, Van Halen might be totally fine. 120 decibels, maybe not so fine, but at 90, sure, 80 or even 85, great. Do you have any insight? Has there been any research done on why, is there something scientific about what makes some music more likable than others? Not just affinity or exposure to it, where it's played on the radio 15 times and now because you think you like it. It's comfortable, it's familiar. But is there something about chord structure or perhaps the groove or the beat or something like that makes some songs more generally likable than others?
Yes. Again, though, before I get to that as a musicological angle, I'll just double down on your point that it is subjective. And,
always, right. Yeah.
And I think implicit in your question is, why do some people like some things and not others? Setting aside the stuff that's popular. And so you're asking about a neurological basis for aesthetics. And I would say, there's a neuroaesthetics group that I'm part of, and we're trying to sort this out. But it's complicated. People don't all like the same foods. They don't all like the same art and paintings. If you're talking about even color schemes, what color are you going to... You've got purple walls there.
I do.
That's an aesthetic choice. I've got tan walls. And so the idea that there's some aesthetics module that determines what we like and don't like and how to understand what formed it, we don't really know.
Okay.
But, we don't all like the same things. As my grandfather used to say, if we all did, then everybody would want to get with your grandma.
Which is exactly the kind of thing you want to hear from your own grandfather. That's perfect. I love that. That's outstanding. It's true.
Let's talk.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah,
let's talk about those. So there are some principles that musicologists have worked out. And so within a culture and within an era and a set of experiences, we tend to like, and this may sound banal, but it's the best I could do, we tend to like music that's slightly surprising. If it's not surprising at all, we get easily bored. So it's like playing a game of tic-tac-toe as an adult. I mean, when you're a kid, you haven't quite figured out the rules and the constraints, but at some point, you realize, this game is not that challenging.
There's a fixed number of permutations, and my feeble brain is capable of comprehending them all simultaneously. Yes.
Right. So if I'm writing a song and I go da 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 da, that's not much of a song, but I could go da 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 da. Little, not the greatest song in the world, but a little more interesting because there was a surprise there.
Got it.
And so the composer's job is to perfectly balance expectation with surprise. And this applies to melody and rhythm and timbre. When Karen Carpenter gets that gravel in her voice, she's singing, "Long ago and oh so far away." She her voice gets far away, right?
Right.
That's a timbral surprise. So that's part of it.
Interesting. No, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what keeps us going.
Slightly, but emphasis on the term slightly. Now, there are some people who like extremely surprising music, but most people don't. King Crimson is a great example of music that is too surprising for people. There are patterns to it, of course.
Or Schoenberg.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. At the point of Schoenberg, I think it's more like Damien Hirst's Urinal. It's like, I'm going to call this art, and so it is,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Marcel Duchamp, Urinal, or Damien Hirst's Cow in a plexiglass. I got the two confused there for a minute. But King Crimson, we rely on artists to push the boundaries. And all the artists we like, including Van Halen, the Beatles, the Stones, I would say, Stevie Wonder. I'm sort of focusing on sort of the classic rock era.
Sure. Yeah.
They were pushing some boundaries in an interesting way, the way Jacob Collier is today.
Fair. Yes. Right. Yep. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Pushing previously defined boundaries. Yeah.
In various ways, right?
In various ways. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Slightly surprising. Makes sense. Yep. The little twist in the, where you take the third verse and go halftime with the first half of it or something, just to keep it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you modulate up a half step, like in The Gambler.
I saw an article in the last year, the modulation, the percentage of songs, and I don't remember the specifics, but the percentage of songs that were in the top 100 or something that used modulation dropped precipitously in the mid 1990s. And the author of the article's sort of interpretation of this was that hip hop caused this, because it wasn't so much, hip hop is more about the story and the rhythmic nature of it, and not so much about the harmonic structure. And so the modulation kind of went away. Of course, there still are songs with modulations, but not as many of them. And that was a great trick to use.
It's less surprising now because we've heard it so many times.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
The first time you heard it, you probably went, like Scooby-Doo, And then, after the 30th time you heard it, or the 130th, you're going, well, okay, that's just somebody's just reaching in their bag of tricks.
Here we go back into the bag of tricks. Well, which is what those things are. I saw John Bon Jovi's the 4-part miniseries about his career and his current health struggles with his voice, and he very much regrets the modulation that he put into "Living on a Prayer," especially these days, because that's when the song becomes unsingable. Yes. Yeah. But it sure sold him a lot of records. So the regret is tempered, I would believe, by his retirement plan. So yeah. All right. Let's talk about live performance, because you still play fairly regularly. It sounds like. Yep. What types of? I mentioned in the intro that you have played and collaborated, and probably will play again, with many people whose names we know. I'm assuming you also play with people whose names we don't necessarily know. And how often are you playing, and what types of gigs are you doing?
I play pretty much as often as I want to. That can vary from year to year, depending on what else I have going on. But I still do play out. In fact, I think we're
Are you doing public math? Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're pre-recording this, just so everybody knows.
We are pre-recording. Yes, I generally get a little bit ahead of the schedule because otherwise, when people cancel, then I'm screwed. So yeah.
Well, I was thinking about whether to reveal that or not, but I hope to.
Oh, it's totally fine.
Yeah. So in totally 2 weeks, Victor Wooten and I are playing the Helsinki Music Festival in Finland as a duo.
Amazing.
And I leave a couple of days from now to go to Nashville to rehearse with him for a few days, so we can figure out what we're going to do. And everything we do is just so much fun, because it's completely spontaneous. I say that we're going to figure out what we're going to do, but it's just the broadest strokes of, what instrument shall I bring, and what effects pedals, if any, and maybe have at least a couple of tunes we work up to have a basis for moving forward. But the show will be improvised, and whatever it is will be fun.
And will it just be the two of you, or will you have a band? Okay, just the two of you. Oh, wow, that sounds fun. I did tour with him in a 10-piece band a few years back. We did a 12-city tour on the tour bus, and that was great fun.
I played. I will be playing for my book tour in Boston. Livingston Taylor will join me, and we'll play a couple of songs together.
Nice.
We've written a couple of songs together, so maybe we'll just play the songs we've written. In San Francisco, Bob Weir and I will play together.
Wow.
And
That's
we
great.
haven't yet worked out what we'll play. We may not work it out. We may just bring a couple of guitars and just do what we feel like in the moment.
Yeah.
And then recently I sang with Bobby McFerrin at a show in Berkeley.
Okay.
So, all these different kinds of things, often as a duo, but sometimes in a 10-piece band, or sometimes I'll sit in with a jazz quintet for a number or two. And there's a group here in LA called the Deductions.
Okay.
And it's a bunch of the A-list session players who just want to blow off steam.
Sure. Makes sense.
And they play once a month, and it's a changing cast of characters. It's whoever's available. But it might be David Jackson on bass, who was a member of the house band at the Troubadour and played with the Association and the Turtles and the Mamas and the Papas, and Linda Ronstadt was a regular on the Andy Williams show. Co-wrote "Joy to the World," which was a hit by Three Dog Night.
The Three Dog Night, "Joy to the World," not the one 100 and 200 years ago, whatever. Yep.
So he'll often be on bass, maybe Gary Novak on drums, Dylan O'Brien on keyboards, Dean Parks on guitar, and they allow singers to come in and sing 2 songs maximum.
Okay.
No originals.
Okay.
And, Steve, it's a Steve Lindsay on organ. It's a wonderful thing, and I do that whenever our schedules coincide.
That's amazing. That's outstanding. So, what instruments do you play, Dan? I know you're a singer and a songwriter too. You've released many singles and at least 2 albums that I know of.
Yeah.
Yep. What instruments, like, you probably play more instruments at home than you would be willing to play in a crowd in front of people on stage. So what instruments do you play on? You're brilliant. You're like me. That's perfect.
I sometimes, if I'm at a gig and there's a drum set there, just because it's set up and there's no drummer, I'll just sometimes walk up on stage and start playing drums. I mean,
that's
if
great.
I know the people in the band, I wouldn't.
Yes. That was understood. Yes. Yeah. We all
bass,
here know not to just do that. Yes.
Bass, drums, guitar, vocals, saxophone, keyboards.
Yeah.
What
was your first instrument?
Saxophone. Well, clarinet, which morphed into saxophone.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh? Fascinating. That's great.
So on my first album, for example, Turnaround, I played all the instruments, except Victor Wooten played bass on one song and Steve Bailey played bass on a song. And I was having trouble with although I played the lead guitars in all the other songs, including slide guitar, there was one song that I just couldn't get what I wanted. And so I called up my buddy Elliot Randall, original guitarist from Steely Dan, who played the solo on Reelin' in the Years.
On Reelin' in the Years, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I said, you want to have a crack at this? And he just, he's in London. He recorded his parts. They were just amazing. Then for my next record, I had a similar problem where I had a tune. I really like the tune a lot. It's called "This Is My Refrain." And it's an old tune I had written in the late 80s. And it was just it was a groove. And it had these kind of opaque, spoken lyrics for the most part. And opaque is one way of putting it. Arty or poetic is another, depends
on your taste. That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the song just wasn't working for me, and so I had this idea. I called in Roger Rosenberg, who's been touring with Steely Dan on saxophone for 20 years, and before that was with Stan Kenton and had also played with Chet Baker for many years.
Yep.
And so he just walked in the studio and he just listened to the tune once, and then he blew this most amazing baritone sax solo and accompaniment. He plays throughout the whole song, and it turns, and there are gaps in my singing, so it turns it into a conversation, a call and response. And it was just so mind-blowing what he did.
That's awesome. Okay, so you've built up quite the Rolodex over the years, and you've mentioned, a smattering of the names in it. How does a cognitive neuroscientist who's also a musician, how have you gotten to know all of these people?
Well, some of them I knew apart from being a cognitive psychologist. So, for example, I met Bob Weir way back in the 70s when I was working for an outfit in San Rafael, California, that reconed speakers for the Grateful Dead when they blew them out. That's how I made a living for a while.
That was your job, sure. Yeah.
And I met Roseanne Cash and Rodney Crowell when I was working for a record label. I was doing A&R at Columbia Records, and stayed in touch with them. But really what happened was when the book came out, the book, Brain on Music, came out, a lot of people that I had met along the way, or people I hadn't, got in touch and wanted to know more about what I was up to. And that evolved into, hey, let's play together sometime.
Yeah. That actually makes perfect sense. And your education history, you initially went to school for music at, if memory serves, at Berkeley, right? And then sort of launched off into a playing career and went back to school for the science stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, that's more or less right. Yeah.
More or less right. Okay. I knew I had it, but memory's foggy. Close enough. Perfect. Great. So you really have had many different phases to your life / career, whatever you want to call it there.
Yeah. And, the question is, how do I get gigs, I suppose? And sometimes somebody will call and they'll say, we saw this program you did with Roseanne Cash. It's on YouTube. We'd like to hire you and come do it for us. Or David Byrne called one day and said, the New Yorker Festival asked me to fill an hour of time. And I'm going to talk about the future of the music business for 15 minutes. And why don't you talk about Brain on Music for 15 minutes? And then we'll play some new tunes that I just wrote with darn it.
The mind is a funny thing.
Yeah. So David had just written some tunes with Brian Eno, and Brian couldn't make the gig. So David said, I seem to recall that you're a guitar player. Do you want to play the Brian Eno parts on these songs? Sure. Count me in.
Yeah, that's great. That's what takes the fearless and shameless musician in you to say, sure, I'll play the Brian Eno parts. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, Brian Eno's parts just fit. They just sit right on the guitar. I mean, there's no weird stretches or things. They're beautifully sculpted parts, and so learning them was straightforward, and then trying to play them with the right intentionality and emotion was the job.
That's the job. Yeah. Well, and of course, the Brian Eno doing the job of writing them in the first place.
Yeah, well,
must not be glossed over. Yeah.
People don't realize this, but you as a guitarist, I believe you and I have talked about this. Jimmy Page is a really sloppy guitarist. You hear all kinds of finger slips and missed stuff, but he wrote those parts, and we can all remember those parts. So that's the key.
That's the key. Yes, right. That's the key. It's the execution. I mean, that's his style, and we all know those parts. That's right. Yeah, for sure. You as we were getting ready to do this, you mentioned you had an interesting gig recently, a bad gig recently. You want to tell us about that?
You were kind enough to give me preparatory notes, and you said that you might ask about a bad gig that I'd had.
Yeah.
And truly, I haven't had a bad gig in decades. When I
That's
was
good.
just starting out, I'd have bad gigs where, there'd be like 6 people in the audience and we just couldn't motivate to give a darn, which is bad because I
That
later
is bad.
learned. I later learned from my friend Parthenon Huxley, who now tours with the current version of ELO, the Electric Light Orchestra, but as a lead singer and lead guitarist. But he's had many gigs where people didn't show up before he was with ELO as a solo artist, and he said, "Don't punish the people who showed up."
Oh, that's a great yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I play gigs all the time. I talk about many of them on this show. I make notes so that I don't forget, about certain moments at gigs because it's easy for them to sort of get glossed over, especially over time. And there was one moment that is sitting on my list here that is very germane to this point that you made. I did a short run this spring of Spring Awakening, the musical. Band was on stage as it, I believe, should be, and I think usually is for that show. So obviously very aware of who's in the crowd and what's happening. And there was the theater was experimenting with the idea of doing Friday matinees in the summer. And this was the first Friday matinee that the theater had ever done in this way. There had been one-off Friday matinees when they were going to bus a bunch of people in or something like that. But this was the first of what was going to be a pattern. I think they have since opted to not continue the pattern. However, in a theater that holds, I think 270 people when it's sold out, and many of the shows were, there were 33 people in the crowd for this particular Friday afternoon Spring Awakening performance. And I know that because I counted them from my drum stool.
Right.
I was like, wait a minute, there's enough, there's a number of people in here that is small enough that I bet between these next two
countable.
songs,
Yeah.
It is countable. Yeah. And so I counted it. And then later in the show, I counted it again just to make sure I had it right.
Or make sure nobody had left.
Yeah, well, that too. Well, I was pretty sure nobody had left because I felt like I was on a one-to-one basis with each person. But everybody stepped it up. That was one of, if not the best performances of the run. And it was, I think, because of that, we realized, wait a minute, we have to deliver. These people came out. This is an experiment that the theater did. It's not their fault that no one else showed up. It's their fault that they showed up. And let's give them the best show that anybody got. And you know what? Let's make those people that didn't come to this show wish that they had. And that's it wasn't really discussed until set break or what the heck, the intermission in the theater world. I can never get that term right. But it was at intermission that we all kind of talked about it. It was like, wow, we're really delivering today. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Let's keep that up. Like these people, they, especially the ones that stay through intermission, like they really deserve this. So yeah, it makes a difference. Yeah. Don't punish the people who showed up. I like that. We have a phrase that we say at least once every episode, which is always be performing, which fits into that. But that don't punish the people who showed up is a subset of the always be performing.
Parthenon is very, very good with a turn of phrase, very articulate, smart guy. And he's got a book a memoir that he'll be publishing soon, I hope. I'm thinking, bad gigs, you break a string or you blow a tube or, in recent times, sometimes I'll go up to a mic and the mic doesn't work. And so then I'll just go to somebody else's mic.
Sure.
Even if I have to stand behind the drummer and sing into his, the show must go on and all of that.
Yes.
And it's only in the last 10 years that I've gotten accustomed to the notion that, hey, if I don't like the way my guitar sounds, I can go over to the amp and I can change the settings. Or if I don't like the way the drum sounds, I can grab a towel and put it. I don't feel that I have to be perfectly ready from the downbeat of the first song to the ending of the last song and just go straight through without making any adjustments. I always used to freak out that I was unprofessional if I couldn't just play without stopping.
Oh, no. I played a gig on Sunday. I played a lot of gigs this weekend. It was a festival gig, so quick, changeover on and off the stage using house drums, but I brought my own snare and cymbals. I was playing with a band that was my first gig with this band. I was subbing with them. I had built charts for it. I basically read the gig down. In fact, the drummer who came on afterwards, he's like, "Did you read that whole gig down?" I was like, "Well, like half of it." He's like, "Wow." I'm like, "I'm kind of pissed that you noticed." He's like, "No." He's like, "You were performing." He's like, "I noticed because I noticed." I'm like, "Okay, that's fair. But we got halfway through the first song, and I did not like the way my snare drum sounded on that stage. And I had put it's called the Big Fat Snare Drum, the BFSD. I had that muffle. It's kind of a muffle ring on the snare that I had from, I think, an indoor gig, and I just put it on. I hit it once. It was like, yeah, this is great. And we're in the middle of the groove, and it was like, no. And I thought, the front of house engineer is probably not going to love me for what I'm about to do. But in between beats, I just ripped the thing off the snare and kept going. And it was much better. Yes, you can adjust. Absolutely, you're allowed to adjust. Yeah. I don't know. Back to your story about bad gigs. Sorry.
Bad gig. So I had learned that I have a pretty good falsetto, and decided, as just for fun, to record one of my favorite songs from when I was a kid called "Hey There, Lonely Girl," sung by Eddie Holman, and the whole song is in falsetto, and he's going, "Hey there, lonely girl." And he's way up in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And so I recorded.
You do. You have a very nice falsetto, Dan.
Oh, thank you. I recorded it at home with a new arrangement that tried to stick as close to the actual arrangement as possible.
Sure.
And then my friends in the deductions heard it, and they said, "Hey, you ought to come sing that song with us."
Oh.
And so if you like, you can play a little bit of the "Hey There, Lonely Girl" that I sent you, the recording, because this is what they heard. Some of this.
Okay, got it. Yeah, man. Very nice. Oh. Ooh, nice. I like that. That's great. That's great.
You. And it's in the original key.
Okay.
And
right.
He's like 25 when he's singing, and I'm like 65 when I'm singing. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, so you should be feeling pretty good. That sounded great. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I go to the gig, and the gig is like at 10 at night, of course.
Okay. Yeah, right.
And it's California, so people aren't smoking, but I've been talking all day, and it's 10 at night, and I usually go to bed at 9:30. And I go to sing it, and my voice is just not there. I'm really pitchy, and it was awkward. And fortunately, because they're all A-list studio professionals, one of them starts accompanying my vocal line on the keyboard, and another kind of sings along with me, and it kind of worked. But when I go for the high note, and I don't know if I can do it now, but "Don't you know this lonely boy loves you?"
You got there.
I can sort of do it now. I'm not warmed up or anything, but late at night, it was bad.
Yeah.
And so it was a forgiving audience and a forgiving group, but yeah, I felt really like I had bitten off more than I could chew. I had taken for granted that what I could do during the day, I could do at night and at that hour of the night, and in a live setting. I'd never done the song live. And later, one of the singers in the band who does a lot of falsetto work, said on a day when he knows he's going to sing even one falsetto song, he doesn't talk all day.
Yeah.
And he takes prednisone and Advil and Tylenol and just
Yep. Those are all the industry tricks, right? The talking. I would just. I can't remember if it was last week's episode or the week before. That I had for the first time in a decade sang at the end of a day at a conference, where I'm talking all day. I think it was even on stage giving an hour-long presentation that day. And talking is the worst thing for our voices. Singing all day would have been much better than talking all day. Yeah, and of course, whispering being the absolute worst thing you can do to your throat. But yeah, the anti-inflammatories, either prednisone or Advil or whatever, it can help. Really, the trick is hydration. That's the key. Yeah, but yeah. Well, it happens. You sounded great on the recording, and you sounded great here. So,
thank you.
Did you that recording? Did you use much, if any, auto tune on that? It didn't sound like you did.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
I did 3 or 4 takes.
Okay,
and then cobbled them together.
Yeah,
made a composite. And it was mostly not for pitch stuff, but for expressive changes.
Yeah, of course.
A little timing thing or a little change of timbre.
Yeah, makes sense. No. It didn't sound auto-tuned. It sounded like you sang it, and if you were a little off of the note, you floated to it in a musical way, and it.
Well, I'm not a fan of auto-tune.
Same. There are times where in a studio setting, I will use it especially on harmonies if something's just not working. But oftentimes it's if you've got somebody right there, it's just like, just re-sing it. I'll let them try like 3 or 4 times, and then it's like, you know what, that take was perfect. That's great, got it. And then you just we'll give them a little help. It's fine. Yeah, in the interest of time, let's move on. Yeah, that's
exactly.
Right. This is a great segue into something that you the Levitin Effect. I don't even know how to describe it. Which is to say, basically, if I'm distilling it down, that many people have pretty good relative pitch is kind of what you said. I think, actually, I guess the way it was first shown to me was that you said that most people, if asked to start singing a song that they know well, will sing it either in or very close to its original key. And that's an interesting little thing for sure.
Yeah, so I don't call it the Levitin Effect. That I would be mortified and too embarrassed.
Of course, that's why I call it that. Yeah.
Somebody else called it that, and it kind of stuck. But
got it. It's in Wikipedia that way, so there you go.
It is an interesting effect, which is that all of us have good relative pitch, meaning that, if I sing Happy Birthday in any key or pretty much at any tempo, you'll recognize that it's Happy Birthday. You don't have to hear it exactly the way you've heard it. And so really, for us to function as musicians, we have to be able to recognize songs in different keys, and you could actually change all the pitches in a song. And it would still be recognizable, right? That's what we call transposition.
Right. That's the transposition, sure, yeah.
Keyboard
players, that's the little button on your keyboard that changes the letters. No, sorry.
Right. And so there's no reason that the brain would keep track of the actual absolute pitches. But it does. And so you ask people to sing a song, and they tend to remember it at the absolute pitch and pretty much at the absolute tempo. And so the reason it got some attention 30 years ago or whenever it was because it ran counter to theories of memory in animals and humans, as had been worked out by neuroscientists and psychophysicists and people who study memory. It made no sense. And when you look at other phenomena, like when you have a conversation with somebody, you tend not to remember the exact words. You remember the gist of it.
Yep.
We often say, well, I don't know exactly what he said, but this was more or less, this was
this
the
is how I
intention.
interpreted it. Right. Yeah.
And so music was thought to be the same way, and in fact, it's not. So,
Yeah.
it's
Interesting. Huh. All right. Well,
So we have this dual thing because we recognize it in the absolute pitch, but we also recognize it in transposition. So memory is more nuanced and complicated than we thought.
yeah. I mean, the more we learn, right? That's kind of how it goes. Interesting. Fascinating. We could stay here for hours, Dan. But I want to be respectful of your time. I want to be respectful of our audience's time. So
mostly them. Yeah.
Mostly them. Yeah. Because you and I will do this. So let's make sure we do this again sometime. Same. I hope you have some great gigs with, it's just the one performance with Victor coming up, right? And then I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
I'll be with Renee Fleming in Washington, D.C. on August 24th after this airs.
Before this airs. It's the Saturday before this airs. That's right.
Sorry,
before
this airs. Yeah,
that's okay.
We'll be presenting our books and singing together at the Library of Congress. And I thank you. I'm looking forward to the gigs in the various cities.
Yeah. That's great. Where do you have any other stories or anecdotes or anything that you would like to share before we say goodbye to one another for now?
I'll just mention that for those who get the book, I heard there was a Secret Chord. It's available in all the usual places that books are sold. There's an audio book that I read myself, narrated.
Nice.
And there's playlists on all the major streaming services of all the songs mentioned in the book in order. And there's like 300 songs.
Oh, wow. Huh. All right. Well, now I know what I need to do on Spotify and Apple Music. I will endeavor to have links to those playlists right here in the show notes, and I'll definitely have links to certainly the Amazon link where you can find the book. I'll put a link to your website, daniellevitin.com. Do you want me to link anywhere? Do you want to tell people to find you anywhere else, or is that a good place
I think those are the places, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for hanging out with us, Dan. It's been a pleasure getting to chat with you again. It's been too long, my friend. I mentioned those 3 magic words that we like to say here at the end of every episode. I mentioned them earlier. Would you like to do the honors for me, Dan?
Always be performing.
Woohoo! Love it. Thanks so much. See you next week, folks. And it's that simple. Amazing.